If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and of course, use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. My name is Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and literary editor, and I focus on stories by, for, and about women.
And I'm Melanie Hill, writer, editor, and poet, and I have a passion for spy stories, fairy tales, and master detective novels.
On today's episode, Melanie pitched Can You Ever Forgive Me so that we can study world building. This 2018 film was directed by Marielle Heller from a screenplay by Nicole Holofcener, I hope I'm saying that right, and Jeff Whitty, based on the book by Lee Israel. Of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. And as always, we would love it if you could give the show a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it from your phone. Just go to the show's landing page, scroll to the bottom, click the 5 stars. It's that simple. All right, Miss Melanie, Can You Ever Forgive Me? Tell me about the world building.
Well, now, I chose this movie deliberately to start off my in-depth study of world building because it is as far away from fantasy and science fiction I think that you can possibly get, right? And it's important to deliberately do that because we do need to consider the world our characters exist in outside of those particular genres of writing, because I don't think sometimes we pay enough attention to it, right? So now the world of the characters, that they inhabit is a feature of all stories. So it's something to pay attention to and to learn how to create. Now, last week I started big and I looked at the blank space at the start of a story and how the movie Ray filled that space with 3 storylines, deliberate setting choices, and it also covered 40 years of time. Now, this week, I'm going to look at Dwight V. Swain's points about world building, but I'm going to do that through Janet Burroway's lens. So in writing fiction by Burroway, she says in summary that setting must do more than one thing at a time. It must reveal emotion in order to illuminate character, and setting must suggest the story's symbolic underpinning. She also says that the story world must work with your narrative. Now, both Ray and Can You Ever Forgive Me are based on true stories. So these people existed, and so did the space they occupied. However, we as writers aren't interested in every aspect of their world. We are interested in the parts of our character's world that supports the story we're telling. So place, right, can illuminate character, as Burroway said. So we need to pay attention to this. Now, as I mentioned, this week I'm going to look at some of the points that Swain makes about world building in his book, Techniques of the Selling Writer, and particularly on pages 46 to 48. Now, Swain proposes that there are 3 key points to remember about your story world. The first is that your reader has never been there. The second is it's a sensory world. And the third is it's a subjective world. Now, you as the writer are the creator of your story world. You create the world in relation to the world you occupy and move about in day to day. But you can't assume that your readers or viewers know the fictional world, or particularly not in the same way you do. So you must then create that world for them. Build the fictional world so your characters can occupy it and your readers can make sense of the characters' lives. Then you have your characters react to all the sensory stimulus you put there. As a writer, you can use descriptions of all the senses, but in a movie, you have the visual cues and characters' reactions to all the sensory information the audience can't taste, feel, or smell. Now, consider which sensory cues you want to draw your reader's attention to as you create your world. And then we'll go into subjective. So, what does subjective world mean? Well, it's focusing on the way your protagonist experiences the world. This is how your character reacts to the world and what happens in it. This is where world building links to character and with empathy, because it's the character's reaction to what's happening in the world that tells the reader all about them. So the setting must also mirror the feelings of the character and where they are in their world at that particular point in the story, as well as in the larger context of the world that you're creating. The world is moody and it is subjective. It focuses on the specifics of the character's experience, their likes and dislikes, and it evolves along with the characters and the story as well. So let's just test these 3 key points out on Can You Ever Forgive Me? This is a story based on a book by the main character, Lee Israel. So she was a real person and she lived in New York. Now, New York is a setting for many movies and books, but I personally have never been there. The New York in Can You Ever Forgive Me is not the same version of the New York we saw in When Harry Met Sally, King Kong, or Ghostbusters. It's Lee Israel's version and one that the audience is not familiar with. Now, Lee's world is established within the first 10 minutes of the film and then reinforced throughout the movie. So, for example, in the opening scene, Lee is holding a tumbler with scotch and ice. She doesn't drink soft stuff like beer or wine, she drinks the hard stuff. And for the rest of the movie, every time she drinks, it is hard spirits. She is seen in the same bar, in a number of scenes, drinking the same drink. Another example of Lee's world is her apartment. The first time we see it, it's cluttered and small. There are dead flies on her pillowcase, which she flicks off. And then later she asks the building manager to get someone in to fix the fly infestation in her apartment. Later again, the manager, Lee's friend Jack, and the exterminator all gasp for air when she opens her apartment to them. And I'll discuss the sensory world shortly, but we'll learn how awful Lee's very small world has become. Now, this is contrasted nicely with the apartment of Lee's agent, Marjorie. It's lovely and filled with refined, successful people like Tom Clancy. There's also the book and antiquity dealers' stores. They are all very similar with slight variations, but this is a world that cares about the same thing Lee cares about. These are places that represent a better time when the world honoured the written word. The bookshops are also filled with people who make money off the sale of nostalgia and of other people's private correspondence. So there's a question, I think, about the morality and the ethics that sit below the surface of such respectable businesses. Now, Lee fits right into a morally questionable world. She's not adverse to stealing toilet paper, a coat, harassing ex-girlfriends, or her agent on the phone. Lee's world isn't one that's familiar to us as viewers, but the small details about where we see her illuminate the type of person she is and support a story about literary fraud. Swain's second point is that the story world is sensory. This is where writing beats visual storytelling mediums because we can describe how something feels, how it smells and tastes, where movies can't do that. Having said this, though, Can You Ever Forgive Me does a good job with allowing us to smell and taste Lee's world. Now, there's Lee sculling her drink, watching that actually makes me wince, and I can't scull drinks like that anymore. I don't know if I ever could, but I'd like to think that I didn't. And also there's Lee's smell, right? We hear other characters tell her she smells, but it's not until we see other characters reel at the odour in her apartment and we discover the cat poo, and we're there. We're there. It actually just makes me feel really sick just remembering that part of the movie because I had a very visceral reaction to that. That was gross. Anyway, most of the story as well is set in winter, right? We see how cold it is for Lee when she rubs her arms as she's walking at night. And most of the times, the characters are dressed in warmer clothes. We also see Lee interacting with the sensory aspects of the world just like we would. When we watch this movie and really pay attention to the sensory aspects of Lee's world, it becomes apparent that we must take a layered approach to what our characters respond to when we're thinking about writing. So there are the larger sensory aspects of the world, like the weather, and there are places our protagonists go and what they look like, the colours, the light, and the other characters. And there's the protagonist's choice of sensory stimulus as well, what they eat, what they drink, what they wear, and who they choose as friends. Now, the third point Swain suggests is that writers consider their protagonist's world as subjective. Now, Lee does react subjectively to the setbacks she experiences, and a great example of this is when Marjorie tells Lee she should play the game by doing media and turning up to book signings and become a nicer person, put on a clean shirt, stop drinking, and say please and thank you. And she could take the time to make a name for herself. And this is what the literary world expects of Lee, and it's highly subjective and particular to publishing. Now, Marjorie also tells Lee that if she doesn't want to do those things, then maybe she should go and get a job. Now, Lee's subjective response wasn't to go and get a job in a coffee shop. It wasn't to go cleaning. It was to start forging letters from famous writers. All of Lee's reactions to the crises in her life are determined by the world and the literary world that she lives in. As she builds her forgery business, she buys different typewriters that take up space in her already cramped apartment. The detail of the new world that she's creating is also very subjective, but it illuminates Lee's character. And I put forward that the joy that she feels by emulating the writers that she admires. And we can see that potentially come out through the course of the movie. So can I also say that I'm not sure if being restricted to home arrest when you're as introverted as Lee is actually a punishment. And again, this fits with Lee's character and is consistent in her world. So just to round out the world building at the end of the movie, we go from starting with it being winter and then at the end it's springtime in New York. And we also see that Lee's apartment is neat. There's a new kitten and she's typing on a computer. So there's been a big shift in her world from the beginning to the end of the story. Now, I really like Swain's 3 key points to remember about your story world, which were, remember your reader has never been there. It's a sensory world and it's a subjective world. And the world building in Can You Ever Forgive Me does more than one thing at a time. It does reveal character and it does signal the symbolic aspects of the story. So Valerie, how did you go this week with Lee Israel?
This is really interesting. We've picked up on a lot of the same points. Now, I couldn't talk about her apartment because, like you, I was grossed out by it all. So I've skipped over that. But this is really interesting to me. It's fascinating. Okay. I have actually seen this movie before. And I remember that at the time, something felt off about it. I remember being unsatisfied with it at the end. Although at the time I didn't go back and analyze it to find out why. Well, now I know why. It has to do with Lee as a character. Now, I want you to cast your mind way, way back to seasons 2 and 3 when I studied beginnings, middles, and ends of stories. My primary focus then was on plot. And honestly, I can't remember if I talked about character at all at that time. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I can't remember. What I want you to remember here, I've said this before, I'll say it again. Everything in story has a hierarchy. Everything, even plot and character. Now, of the two, character is king because nobody cares about what's happening unless they care about who it's happening to. So, the beginning, middle, and end each have important functions with respect to the architecture of the plot, absolutely, but they also represent phases of the character's arc. The beginning of a story shows the reader who this character is in her before state. The ending shows the reader who the character is in her after state. The middle, then, is the process by which the character changes from the before state to the after state, or if the character doesn't actually change, it's the process by which the character's true self is revealed to the reader. And remember, character is revealed through action under pressure. So, what a character does tells us who they are. Alrighty, so who is Lee in the before state? In other words, in the beginning hook or act one of the story, what do her actions tell us about her? Well, she is mean and bitter. She has zero social skills and she hates people, although she does love her cat. She's a loner. The only human relationship she has is with her agent, whom she treats with complete disrespect. She's a slob. Like we already talked about her apartment. It's disgusting. She smells, her clothes are dirty, and she looks like she smells. They've done a really good job with the costume design and the hair and the makeup. She looks like she smells. She's a literary snob, and she sees her work and her craft as being better than anybody else. She takes a swipe at Tom Clancy, both him as a person and his work. She believes that because she was once on the New York Times bestseller list, that she is therefore above playing the game. She's very unhappy, and she's a thief. She steals toilet paper from her agent's closet. When faced with the choice of going back out into the cold with her own coat, which is thin and isn't keeping her warm, or stealing from the coat check at her agent's party, she steals the coat. When she finds a genuine letter from Fanny Bryce in a library book, she steals it and sells it for $75. When faced with the truth that no one is going to pay for a Lee Israel book, does she take her agent's advice and work to revive her career? Melanie, you talked about this just a minute ago. No, she isn't, because that's not who she is. She is not a hard worker. Instead, she chooses to forge another letter from Fanny Bryce, and when she's rewarded with an even higher selling price, she decides to up the ante by writing more letters from other deceased authors. The question now is, who is Lee in the after state? In other words, what do her actions in the ending payoff, or Act 3 of a 3-act structure, reveal about who she is now that she has gone through the journey of being a criminal and getting caught? Well, she's pretty much the same person. And that's why I found the ending so unsatisfactory. It turns out that Lee Israel, the one in the film anyway, is exactly who she appeared to be. And that is not very interesting. In the beginning, her agent told her to clean up her act, to get a job to pay the bills, to start rebuilding her writing career, and she refused. In the end, her lawyer tells her to clean up her act and to get a job, and she refuses again. Now, she does apply for a job, although we don't know if she gets it, and we don't see her there. And she does work at a cat shelter, but she never does go to AA, which is a requirement. In the beginning, it's just her and her cat, Jersey. When Jersey dies, she throws Jack, the one friend that she has made, she throws him out and she wants nothing more to do with him. When she does eventually contact him again, it's not to apologize. It's to ask if she can use him in a book. He says that she's mean, and she agrees. She calls her ex-partner Elaine, and Melanie, as you said, she's been harassing Elaine this whole time, and Elaine finally meets her. But Elaine will have nothing to do with her either because she's so mean. And she says, it's not my job to worry about you anymore. At the end of the film, it's just Lee and her new kitten alone in her apartment, exactly the way it was at the beginning. In the beginning, Lee believes that she's a better writer than those who are making a living from their work. In the end, she doesn't regret her forgery. This is big. She does not regret her forgery, and she sees it actually as proof of her literary ability. She's proud of the work and says that she's had the time of her life. The only thing she regrets is getting caught. In the end, she writes yet one more letter from Dorothy Parker, letting the bookstore owner know that the letter that he's trying to sell is a fraud. Now, this last letter is clearly a fake. She's not trying to pass it off as something that's real. But still, the fact that she does it, one, shows that she has quite a bit of audacity, in my opinion, but that she shows no remorse. So she's the same in the end as she was in the beginning. We would have expected her in the end to show remorse, to sort of learn her lesson, to recognize the value of a friendship, one at least, or some human relationship, learn from the relationship she had with Elaine and losing about that, learn from the fact that everybody tells her she's mean and nasty and awful. That's what a character who changes, that's what they look like. They're different at the end than they are at the beginning. Lee is exactly the same at the end as she was at the beginning, and who we saw her as in the beginning is exactly who she is the whole way through. So, in the middle of the film, every time, and the middle of the film, remember, is supposed to be this journey from your before state to your after state, right? And dramatizing the shift that's happening in a character. But here, in this movie, in the middle or act 2 of a 3-act structure, every time Lee has a choice to make between doing something honest and doing something dishonest, she chooses the dishonest act. It's really predictable. For example, one of the people she's been selling to warns her that the FBI are onto her. When faced with this knowledge, she has a choice to stop forging the letters and to find an honest way to earn a living, which is what her agent has been trying to get her to do. But she doesn't. Instead, she enlists Jack to sell the fake letters on her behalf, and he gets more for them than she did. Jack suggests stealing real letters and selling them, and replacing the real letters with fake ones. Now, this is even worse than what she had been doing. Again, she has the choice of stopping her criminal behavior and going and getting a real job and earning an honest living, but she will not do it. Why? Because she's a thief. That was established in the opening scene when she stole the toilet paper and the coat from her agent's house. So it's no surprise that she decides to take the real letters, replace them with fakes, and sell the real letters. Since everything in a story is connected to everything else, when Lee acts exactly the way we expect her to act, it drains the narrative of tension and conflict and interest. We keep watching in the hope that she'll learn her lesson, and in the end, that this will be some kind of redemption story. But it isn't. It really isn't. The character is exactly who she appears to be. I can't say that enough. She never reveals herself to be anything more or anything less. And she doesn't change who she is either. So last week I talked about, characters can change and be a different person at the end than they are at the beginning. Or sometimes, like with The Godfather, they just reveal their true character over the course of the story. Neither one of these things is applicable to Lee Israel, as represented in this film. Even when it's clear to her that she is alone and lonely, because she is lonely, because she's mean and because she's a drunk, she just agrees with it. She says to Jack, yeah, I am mean and nasty. And I'm supposed to be at AA right now. And I'm not. I'm just not going. I'm going to sit in this bar and I'm going to get drunk again. And she just goes and gets another cat to replace Jersey. So her life will be exactly like it was when we saw her on page 1 of the screenplay. When she's presented with all of these opportunities to get her act together and change her ways and become a better person, she ignores every single one of them every single time. She keeps choosing to be deceitful. And what's more, she keeps getting away with it. Yeah, I mean, I know at the end she's caught and she goes to court. But Melanie, you said this. The punishment that she receives, which is house arrest, is hardly punishment for her. It's right up her alley. It's what she wants, the world to leave her alone. I guess the one thing that seems to change is that she keeps her apartment clean. And you said that too, Melanie. However, my guess is because she is the same person at the end as she was at the beginning, it's a matter of time between that apartment becomes the cesspool that it was when Jack comes in to offer to help her. So, in the short term, maybe her apartment's going to stay clean. I mean, that's something, I guess, but is it enough to carry a whole story? No. So Lee is just not an interesting character. And as a result, unfortunately, to me, the story was really boring. It was just the same thing over and over and over again for 2 hours. Anyway, Melanie, what's the action step?
Well, before that, can I ask you a question? So there is a change, right, in the world, in the physical world, like we both picked up on in terms of her apartment and the seasons. And so if we think about world supporting the story, the conclusion by putting our two pieces of the puzzle together means that the world building actually doesn't support the character by the end of the film. Like I think it does very much at the beginning, but at the end of the film, we're seeing that the character hasn't changed, but the world is suggesting or trying to present that she has changed. So I think that's something to be cautious of, right, when we're writing our stories and paying attention to when we're world building and the changing arc or the changing arc of the character. Have you thought anything about that since you've heard what I was saying about the world and comparing that to what you were saying about character development?
Totally. I totally get what you're talking about here. And yes, it does seem to suggest that something has changed, but nothing has changed. So that's why I'm saying it's only a matter of time between her apartment goes back to the mess that it was in the first place. I mean, why am I saying that? Why? Because Lee is not the type of person to keep her apartment clean. Think about, do you make your bed in the morning? Is that a habit you have? Are you the type of person that makes your bed every morning? Some people are. Some people are not. If you don't make your bed every morning and you want to become the type of person who makes their bed every morning, then you have to change. Something about you has to change, whether that's your time management, whether that's what time you wake up in the morning, something has to change in order for the environment to change. Even something as simple as getting the bed made every morning. Lee hasn't changed. And she is determined to stay the same way she was in the beginning because she feels that she's right and everybody else is wrong. And she feels no remorse. In her mind, there is no need to change and to be anyone other than who she is. And the irony, of course, is that she wrote this memoir and profited from it, right? So she kind of pulled another fast one. That's who she is.
Yeah, but she didn't write anything after this, did she? She wrote the book, the memoir, and then the research that I did suggested that she didn't write much more after this at all. Because I think the book came out in the late 2000s and she passed away in 2014. So I think this was the last thing that she wrote that was ever published as well. So you're right, she profited from it. But the thing, she never went on to do the thing that she loved doing, and she never went back to forging, as far as we know.
Well, this is interesting because she's claiming to be this great writer, yet she doesn't write. And her agent does say to her, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something like, write a book in your own voice. It's what you've been threatening to do all along. And I guess that became her memoir rather than writing biographies of Estee Lauder and whoever else she wrote biographies of. And just as a side note, the advice that Marjorie gives to Lee to revive her career still holds true today. So each and every one of us can take Marjorie's advice to heart. Go out to the book signings, play the game, make a name for yourself. All of that still is true today.
So the action step for today is write a description of your character's home. Think about what's in there that she would not want anyone to see or find. And are there public and private areas within that home? What could the home tell a reader about your character?
And please don't have cat poo under your protagonist spread. All right, let's wrap it up for this week. No more cat poo. Join us again next week when we discuss Bridget Jones's Diary. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. For access to writing templates and worksheets and more than 70 hours of training, subscribe to my Inner Circle by visiting ValerieFrancis.ca/Inner Circle and follow me on Twitter and Instagram @Valerie_Francis. If you'd like to get Melanie's tips about books to help you read like a writer, visit her on Facebook and Instagram under Melanie Hill Author, or find out more about her at melaniehill.com.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.